All right, everyone. Hopefully the connection is seeing another marginal improvement today. Looks like the little skippy, but hopefully everything will come through audio-wise just fine. There are a number of things I want to hit on today, and we're going to start with food security and scarcity. Again, the big topic in the community as of late, for good reason. Right now, we have record low wheat production, as I mentioned yesterday, and the U.S. reports are showing that soy is now outpacing corn production, and the crops that require more fertilizer, like wheat, are being planted in much smaller volume. Again, according to the USDA. So you need to consider working on those local supply chains and consider farmers markets as well. That's definitely a good avenue for finding local produce. You'll find, and I'm sure you've noticed and picked up on a lot of things that are not local in your supermarket halfway across the world. So over the next weeks, some things I'm going to do to continue expanding my own food security. I'm going to be picking up some more established fruit producing plants, especially citrus, because that does exceptionally well in Florida, especially from local farms. Something else I would also recommend, have the opportunity to scoop up some neem oil. This is really, really good stuff. If you head to my Amazon links below, you can just search through there for neem oil. If you go through that direct, that's why I recommend it, because it does work. It keeps pests and mold on your food. Good morning, Van City. Blackberries and raspberries grow super easily up there. What other than that, I mean, we know I mentioned the what zucchini does really well up there, which I was surprised how well that did out west in the middle of the desert in a raised bed, but seems to do pretty well in most environments, which is a good tip for anyone who's looking to maximize what they're able to do in a small space. So the other thing to hit on with food security, this is an article from Fortune. Gas in Germany, flour in Greece, sunflower oil in Spain. European countries take steps towards rationing. Now, we know that rationing has already started and isn't crippled yet, but they're still dealing with the ramifications of the last several years. So that's compounding the issue. And this article dives a little more into that. As a result of everything that's going on there, wheat and oil have soared, leading to a multi-decade high inflation rate in places like Germany and Spain. The supply crunch in Europe is now so bad, it's causing governments to begin laying the groundwork for rationing, with some stores already limiting supplies. They have several tiers to this in Germany, and this article does break it down as to each tier, sort of. The highest level of rationing that they may consider implementing would result in shutdowns of their manufacturing, which would obviously compound and destroy a number of sectors, even in other countries. And there's a number of our current situation in a good way, obviously. The German government took the first formal steps towards rationing its natural gas supplies this week as it attempts to cut off a decade-long reliance on the Russian energy market. And in Spain and Greece, supermarkets are rationing food, including flour, milk, and sunflower oil. Germany pulled the first lever on its three-stage emergency plan to conserve its natural gas supply on Wednesday, fearing a potential showdown with Russia over gas flows. The move came after Russian President Vladimir Putin demanded natural gas payments in Russian rubles last week, twisting the West's sanctions against itself. Russia remains Germany's top gas supplier, despite the country's attempts to move away from their Russian reliance after the war began. It currently supplies roughly 40% of Germany's natural gas needs, down from 55% prior to the war. He added that the current rationing is largely a preventative measure, and there isn't any acute danger of a loss of natural gas supplies at this time. Now, keep in mind, anytime governments come out and make announcements like that, they're attempting to appeal to the normalcy bias that people have. Things have always been fine They were fine yesterday. You're alive today. Things will be totally fine tomorrow. The other stages are called alert and emergency. And the final emergency stage would state the state would intervene and regulate the flow of gas. Hey, said, we're not there yet, and we don't want to be. But they have the capability of doing that. And that's something that is certainly on the table if the national security of Germany demands it. Now, Deutsche Bank has warned that the first stage of rationing could lead to targeted shutdowns of specified individual large consumers. An analyst for Deutsche Bank added that if Germany is forced to regulate the flow of gas in its third stage of its emergency plan, it could cause even higher energy pricing, along with job and income losses and a reduction in overall economic demand from consumers. This is going to cripple much of Western Europe on a long enough timetable economically as this ramps on. And as I keep pointing out, the timetable that we have to actually get ready, it's coming to a close as purchase limits will inevitably be put into place here. Remember, everything that's happened over the last several years, it usually happened in Europe, and then it happened in a few states, larger states in the US first, and then other states began to implement it, and then it was put out almost on a national level. Moving on to Greece. 4 Greek supermarket chains, AB, and I'm going to butcher all of these, Skakleventis, Kritikos, and My Market have already, not so bad, right? Have already started rationing critical food products, including flour and sunflower oil, after the war in Ukraine caused a supply crunch in the nation. However, like in Germany, current rationing is only a preventative measure at this time. So they say. We know that food production, even before this, had been a problem. So this is only compounding the problem that we've been experiencing over the last several years. Now, an official from the AB supermarket chain told Reuters last week the reason for the cap on these products is only precautionary, as our customers are concerned about the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of panic buying going on right now in Europe for good reason. And I would be inclined to bet that the majority of the people who are panic buying are older people, people who experienced the Cold War, maybe people who grew up post World War II, and they saw what it's like to live in an environment where rationing is a daily experience where, oh, I need this, but I can't get it because I don't have enough coupons or my purchase limits won't allow it or what have you. So I don't know that young people are really heeding these warnings, but I'm sure if you're an international viewer, if you comment below if that's the case, and you are seeing some more switched on young people. But I suspect, as I said, it's probably mostly older people who are well aware of current risks. Greek Development Minister Adonis Gregadius told Ant1 TV that demand for some products has already jumped roughly 200% in recent weeks, as shoppers have rushed to stores to bolster their supplies. Quote, flour and sunflower oil are 2 products which, apart from energy, the war has affected more than anything else, end quote. Now, remember, they said that all of this is being done as a preventative thing and that this is really nothing to be panicked or worried about. But this guy's being a little more honest. Quote, there are already shortages throughout Europe, end quote. We know this. There are international shortages of everything, and this conflict is making the problem much, much worse. People in Europe and many nations will likely face true hunger, and most people just did not heed the warnings. The writing has been on the wall for a long time, and there was plenty of time to put stuff back. Don't delay anymore. If you have the ability to top off your stores, do it. There's a reason I will keep mentioning that over and over again, because the whole point of the philosophy that a lot of us have adopted is to alleviate and prevent unnecessary suffering for ourselves and our families. Russia and Ukraine represent about 30% of Greece's total wheat imports, and the nation's produce on an incredible 76% of the world's exports of sunflower oil. Shortages, ones that would be utilized to artificially spike the prices higher than they already are. So there are concerns that some of these larger retailers could be potentially hoarding certain products on the back end. I've seen a lot of suggestions that that had been happening here in the United States, but you can't hoard what you don't have. And retailers are not inclined to just sit on stuff for inordinate amount of times because they would not only have to likely pay taxes on that at the end of the year, but they want to move that product so they can make money. So at the end of the day, while that might have been going on quite a bit at one point, and there were many articles run that there was some major buying well beyond normal levels, if the stuff doesn't exist, they can't buy it in the quantities they once were. And we've been seeing a lot of brands in grocery stores around the country and in certain markets where we're getting stuff from places we wouldn't normally get it. Brands of butter that we've never seen before. I'm sure you've seen this type of thing too. And so there's anything wrong with it. It's just that all of these major retailers are branching out into things that they wouldn't normally carry because they simply can't get from their normal supply chains. Now, keep in mind that plenty of people will be taken advantage of during all this because of the price hikes, and people who are panic buying right now and are causing additional shortage problems are people who did not prepare previously. These people are not preppers, they're not survivalists, and the media keeps comparing and conflating the two. And on an almost daily basis, I'm seeing pieces now over and over again suggesting that these people are somehow into preparedness. They're not. These are the people who went out and bulk bought toilet paper several years ago to the point where it was not available for. Now, moving on to Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine has supposedly now hit 2 targets, including an oil facility in Russia, which is still burning. This is allegedly the second hit on Russian targets inside of Russia by Ukrainian assets. The latest strike was 25 miles behind the lines. Now, I almost made a video immediately after this happened because this is a pretty big deal. Their ability to have gone this deep into any territory without being detected, and then the equipment that they utilize to carry out the attack. Now, as this continues, if they use NATO supplied equipment to carry out these attacks, that will be a higher level of escalation, but now it will justify higher levels of force and the use of additional equipment that we haven't seen yet that are in Russian arsenals that will certainly shock and awe the world at large. And it's very likely that a lot of people went down to Russian military recruiting depots and things because of these attacks on the Russian homeland. They have not been attacked on their own soil like this since World War II. So this is a big shock for them at large. And I'm sure that the way their media apparatus is spinning it right now is certainly being used as a recruitment and a political tool to convince the masses to have a renewed sense of widespread support for what's going on. NATO is now sending Bushmaster armored cars in, and the Pentagon has announced $300 million in aerial systems for Ukraine. Now, that does include the new Switchblade man-portable drone systems that have the ability to just orbit until you acquire a target, and then you can use that to strike armor columns or troop movements or whatever you feel you need to hit with those drones. The package includes additional tactical secure communications systems, a counter unmanned aerial system, and non-standard machine guns and other defense systems. A lot of the articles on the shipment were fairly vague, but it can be assumed, as I said, that the Switchblade drones are going to be part of that package because we know that we were already sending them in. One of the things that I think is most remarkable about the coverage in this conflict is that the media continues to run the same fluff pieces. What do I mean by that? Because the coverage is almost universally praising only one side in the conflict and condemning the other. And the type of fluff pieces that we see, and people seem to take this as as if this is a sign of victory or something, is what they'll do. And you've seen these, I'm sure, all over platforms like this one, where they have a video they'll be running and it'll be Ivan. He's 27 years old. He used to be a carpenter until 2 months ago. Here he is training in light infantry tactics. He leads a rifle squad on maneuvers through the woods. Here they are learning basic infantry skills like digging fighting positions. Here is them cooking over a fire. Here but they are making do with what they have. And then they interview a couple other people in the unit, and they run these pieces nearly daily without showing the battle lines, without showing the real situation on the ground. They just run pieces like this, and then they will all run the same AP or Reuters press footage of mechanized columns being hit or towns being hit with precision strikes. That's it. And you've seen a lot of channels here that are getting incredible amounts of traffic directed to them because they are running story after story like this. Look at the success. The Ukrainians are now reporting that there are 18,000 Russian casualties. Okay, where's the proof? And if that is the case, even if it is the case, you have to understand that Eastern military doctrine is not the same as Western military. The Russians would view this as, and I suspect they're viewing this as, a training and proving ground to harden their forces, guys who had no combat experience, to get them useful combat experience. And as I've pointed out previously, the way that these Russians react to contact, the way that they get off the X in an ambush, is very professional. It's very well rehearsed. They've clearly trained in this stuff. Where a lot of the tactics I've seen employed by the Ukrainians and the various paramilitaries as they go through some of these smaller villages, let's say the lines shift a little bit. You might have Donbass forces or Russian forces going to a Ukrainian town. They push the Ukrainians out. Well, the Ukrainians come back in. And the way that the Ukrainians move through a lot of these smaller towns, it's not exactly the most up-to-date tactics. They're mostly moving in a staggered column down the street, very Vietnamish, very early Iraq War. A lot of modern doctrine that the Marine Corps has adopted, for example, that I've seen. They've brought in and trained with the Israelis on this, where they'll utilize backyards and they'll just use breaching charges and move through people's houses. Because if you're moving down these fatal funnel streets, one guy with a Mosin Nagant could stop the advance of an entire infantry company. That's basically what we're watching. There's a reason why Mosin Nagant 9130s are being used right now in Ukraine by Donbass forces and Ukrainian irregular forces, because they actually have practical application when you're fighting against an enemy who is using old world strategies. Not a good plan. The other thing I wanted to point out, and that I thought was pretty troubling, that foreign volunteers still continue to pour in to the region. Now, I made a video on this the other day about what a poor plan it is to head somewhere when you have very limited information on what the situation looks like on the ground, and you're being promised all of this, these essentially lies, because they're attempting to backfill positions. They're trying to utilize the men of other nations to fill the holes in their lines, and then they're just going to go become a war hero and start their life anew. And every single day, there are still several reports, just like the ones I was talking about, with little, 27-year-old Ivan, who used to be a carpenter from Kiev, and now he's off, had to become an infantryman because his country's under attack. These foreign volunteers are getting the same type of fluff pieces, and a lot of people are heading there because they can get all kinds of clout. We saw the same thing happen in Syria. But in Syria, at least a lot of those units had the wherewithal to not deploy, and they weren't in such dire straits. That's another point, obvious dire straits, because they weren't using these foreign volunteers typically on the front line. They were mostly there for the Instagram photos. Only maybe a handful of guys actually made it to the front, and those were guys who had prior military experience and were actually an asset to the Kurds, or an asset to some of these other paramilitary groups like the YPG, you're not going to be, they'll give you some basic indoctrination and some basic weapons handling stuff, and they're sending you right to Kiev or right to the front lines. And we know that they're really not being well equipped because the reports have stated just that. I've gone into that already at length, so I won't rehash all of that here. But I saw a report this morning that they tried to play this up as if this is this big epic struggle, but to me it came off as, look at the lack of preparation. It was a piece on the mass manufacturing of homemade body armor in Ukraine. Now, that does not strike me as a nation that was well prepared. And we're looking at a country that, by the way, had huge quantities of Soviet stockpiles. So where did a lot of that equipment go? Because even if they are 30 or 40-year-old armor carriers and ballistic plates, as long as they were stored correctly, they still will provide essentially the same level of protection they did when they were first manufactured. Would I recommend that being your first option? No, but it should still serve its intended purpose. And the fact that they don't have access to even those stockpiles right now should tell you exactly where their minds were at over the last 30 years, where they had all these reassurances from the West and NATO and even Russia at one point that they wouldn't really need to rely on a lot of this stuff. And the same can be said for much of Europe right now. As I pointed out previously, all the entanglements we're now in with NATO and the expansion of NATO into poor Eastern European countries that haven't bothered to modernize their militaries or their equipment, it's going to cause us a lot of pain here in the United States. Yeah, I would agree with that, Hutch. At this point, you can see it even in the search results. You'll type stuff in, and the first 40 or 50 videos at this point with most topics, especially what I'm talking about right now, are usually from priority creators, the big media corporations. You're not generally going to find the independent content creators in the search mechanism anymore. It's just unfortunate. You'll get it in suggested videos still. And the vast majority of people who view my content aren't even subscribers at this point, more often than not, because it doesn't even really, and I've noticed this too, like unless I go to channels I've subscribed to, I often don't see their content in my news feed even. I'll have to go off to the tab on my laptop or whatever and go down to the ones that I want to see, even if I've already hit that bell notification button, because that won't always notify me either at this point. We've seen how that works as of late. The other thing I wanted to point out as far as foreign volunteers in Ukraine, I saw a local newspaper where a local group of religious leaders was and is planning to leave from the United States to go with other relief groups and head to. Now, again, without them having a good picture of what's happening on the ground, and even if they're being told wonderful things once they get there, I wonder if they'll really be able to leave. I'm sure they'll probably fly into Poland and attempt to drive in, but we have seen Russian strikes already within 12 miles of the Polish border. So if they're planning to drive in, it's not exactly the most secure plan. And because most of them would be considered military-aged males, even well into their 60s at this point in Ukraine, I don't know that they'll be allowed to leave. I'll be curious if they don't get their passports torn up in a desperate attempt to leave, unless they have some sort of special envoy type protection because they're religious leaders coming from abroad. So if that's not properly well planned out and hasn't received the stamp of approval from the Ukrainian government, and they don't have the right paperwork with them, I'm really skeptical that they'll be able to just leave. We've already seen report after report of people trying to leave who waited too long, who didn't want any part of this conflict, that have had their passports torn up at the Polish border and turned around because they were a military-age male. And I was wondering if the Ukrainians were doing that past a certain point, because after the first couple of weeks, the only people that you saw making their way into Poland, and we know at one point that they were actually turning military-aged men away. And we're like, nope, you get your happy butt back. You need to go back and defend your country. Well, eventually it became official Ukrainian policy to allow people capable of bearing arms in defense of Ukraine to leave. So that goes right back into that normalcy bias, though. And again, if you're watching this type of content, you're likely the one who would have had the foresight. You would have been Ev. The TV's coming on. It's telling you, hey, no, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, no. There's 175,000 Russian troops on the border, but it's just a training exercise. And then you start to see hubbub on social media where, what do you mean they're issuing live ammunition? They're issuing combat loads, according to Instagram, to these forces on the border. Now, take that with a grain of salt, but that should have been enough warning. Just the very fact that they were amassing on your border, that they're heading into Belarus, that they're expanding their number of troops in Transnistria or Transnistria or whatever, how you pronounce it, in Moldova. They're going to move in to your borders. They've already done this before, but people sat. They sat and sat. And right now, the Red Cross is attempting another mission into Mariupol to evacuate civilians. At this point, I mean, and we're talking even within the past few weeks, we have still seen massive columns of vehicles attempting to leave Mariupol. Why would you? To me, it's just such a strange thing that people would wait to the point, like all the glass in their buildings in Mariupol is shattered from bomb blasts. The buildings there are essentially uninhabitable. There's no water. There's no electricity. Everything has been looted, and people are still seen in place. If they're there at this point, it's probably because they can't physically leave. So the people who had the means to leave or the physical ability to even walk out on foot, you should have left a long time ago. Oh, wow. Thank you, Hutch. I really appreciate that. That's a heck of a praise to be compared to S2. I really, that made my day, man. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, the Mariupol thing is really interesting. There's a channel that I would also recommend if you want to see, and he does have some bias. Let me pull his name up for you. He's a Navy veteran. I've linked him before, and for some reason his channel name doesn't stick in my very well. And I'm sure if I just look up Mariupol, I'm not going to be able to pull him up. If I remember his name, I will link it in a pinned comment below. But his coverage is super interesting because he's been living in Donbass for like 12 plus years now. He's an American U.S. Navy veteran, married a girl, I think, who lives there as a kid there. And he has Patrick Lancaster, I want to say Patrick. Yes, it is Patrick Lancaster, Lancaster. And now he does have a little bit of a bias at this point as well. But that's because he's now been embedded enough to see a lot of the human suffering perspectives on the conflict. And you're not going to get his perspective on TV when he is doing some of the best embedded reporting that I've seen of this entire conflict. And his camera presence and his ability to cover the situation has improved the more and more time he spent in front of and behind the camera. And it's always interesting how a lot of the people react when they'll hear his accent or lack of accent. A lot of them pick up on the fact that he's American, which is surprising because most Americans don't speak a second language. So if you start conversing with a European in their mother tongue, they just assume you're British or Canadian. They almost never would think American. But just seeing the absolute totality and the cost of war, because again, we're only getting that romanticized angle in Western media, as I mentioned, with the foreign volunteers and Ivan the Carpenter. And yeah, it's really very eye-opening. Azov is preventing many people to leave. Yeah, that's been another report too, right? There's been reports where some of these paramilitary units have not been allowing people to leave. And they've, of course, been using schools or other places as staging areas, which does make sense to a point because they're typically hardened concrete structures. Obviously, school's not in session, but it does give them a nice media boost whenever one of those places is directly targeted by Russian forces or Russian paramilitaries. But again, you have to be critical of it. It's like, well, why would the Russians strike a school? Oh, that's because it was a military base at the time. Still for either side, by the way. Both sides are doing not so good things. That's war. It's not romantic. It's not this pretty thing. I never deployed. I was only in the Army very, very briefly. I ended up getting injured, but I spent a lot of time around guys who served in a number of different wars. And to anyone who still flirts with the idea of going to Ukraine, I'll say this. Having spent time with real war veterans, all that romantic nonsense goes right out the window. And sure, war will make you a man, all right. But when you watch the guy next to you take a round inches away from you, You get the survivor's guilt. You get all kinds of mental changes from this. Even working in emergency services, I can tell you that the mental changes that happen to you, the adrenaline dumps, all of that, it completely rewires your brain. It's very, very bizarre. Well, Azov also has this problem where they're a huge portion of them are literally Nazis, but it's okay because they're the West's Nazis. They're just they're not like super Nazis. They're just Nazi light, I guess would be the. It's okay because they're Ukrainian Nazis. If they were Russian Nazis, that would be a problem. Yeah, no, that's. I've watched some of their press releases and things. Like, I don't think all of them are. A lot of them probably flirt with it because it's a little more edgy and it's kind of a hyper nationalistic viewpoint that they can latch onto. But there definitely are legitimately people in that org absolutely subscribe to that ideology. Yeah, volunteer mercenaries are absolutely cannon fodder. And that's exactly what they've been using them as. Again, like Reddit has been one of those absolute gems for the actual situation on the ground for foreign volunteers. And there's that one that I just always comes to mind from having read it where 10 of these guys went out and they were very lightly equipped with only small arms and very minimal ammunition. And they come around a corner and again, no training. Their only background in war fighting is Call of Duty, and they put a few rounds towards a T-72, which immediately just turns its gun towards them, fires, kills 8 of them immediately, and 2 of them were able to come back to base with severe wounds. And I mean, you can't go into a war zone with no knowledge. You could be determined. That's certainly useful, but you got to have some basic fundamental knowledge, or your survivability is going to be zero if you think you can just come around a corner with a 5.45 caliber rifle and crank rounds at a T-72 and think there aren't going to be immediate consequences for that. So if there's anything anybody else wants to add to today's chat, if not, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up today. I do want to start opening live streams up. I want to get a StreamYard account set up. And if there's any of you who want to jump in and we can have some discussions amongst ourselves here, rather than just going through text, I would certainly like to, if there's any especially smaller YouTube channels who need a bump or you think are doing good stuff, and because of things behind the scenes here beyond our control, their views are getting throttled, I would definitely like to help do something about that and bring more attention to those high quality content creators. If you have a channel name or recommendation or someone you think I should reach out to, please link them in the hard comments, not in the live chat, so it'll be easier for me to find them later on. But all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate you all hanging with me on this Saturday afternoon. I hope you all have a good weekend. And again, get out there, do what you can to reestablish your own food security. If you can find those pre-established plants, those pre-established fruit trees that are already bearing, because a lot of what I've already picked up over the last week, I will tell you this, some of it's going to take anywhere from 9 months, 3 years at the current stage that they're at to begin production of food. And if you're starting from seedlings, there might be some stuff that takes much, much longer than that. So I would encourage you to get the already very established stuff, the fruit-bearing stuff, and it's going to cost a little more. You might be paying $60 to $100 plus for a citrus tree, for example, but it'll be well worth it if you're able to make your own cleaning products at home, or you're able to make your own seasonings at home, or the amount of things you can do with different fruits and different leaves and all kinds of things that you can grow in your backyard. It's pretty remarkable. We definitely take the grocery store and our current supply chain situation for granted. Yeah, exactly. Prepping for 20 years is finally paying off. Yeah, I've been doing this pretty consistently. The food production for me has always been an area I've been lagging a little bit, but it's something that I've stepped up over the past several years. And we were able to grow approximately 40% or more of the produce that we consumed over a 6-month period ourselves, which was amazing. It was very liberating to be able to do that. So I want to double down on that again and at least be able to supplement what I'm able to get, just because the scale that I would like to be able to do things at is just not feasible based on space limitations at the moment. But anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. Hutch, again, thank you for the the compliment. I really appreciate. I'll likely be doing some more stuff on Bitchute myself in the immediate future, but I do need to get some more things squared away, like a production space that I'm working on upstairs. Right now, this is not my ideal setup, broadcasting from my kitchen, but it's been working for now. Thanks, guys.